Imagine this. You are part of a rescue team in Russia in 1959. You are looking for 9 missing hikers. You have been searching for weeks in the freezing cold mountains. Finally, you find their tent. But something is very wrong. The tent is cut open. But here is the crazy part. It was cut open from the inside. Someone inside the tent cut their way out to escape. You look inside. There is food. There are warm clothes. There are boots. Everything they needed to survive is still there. But the hikers are gone. Then you look down the snowy hill. You see footprints. Some are bare feet. Some have only socks on. The footprints go down toward the dark forest below. Why would anyone run out of their tent in the middle of the night with no shoes? It was 30 degrees below zero. That is cold enough to freeze your skin in minutes. What were they running from? Over the next few weeks, search teams found all 9 bodies. But what they found made no sense. Some had broken bones but no cuts or bruises on the outside. One person was missing their tongue. Some of their clothes had radiation on them. The Soviet government kept this case secret for many years. Even today, 65 years later, nobody knows for sure what happened. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. It is one of the scariest unsolved mysteries in history. And I am going to tell you everything we know about it. Stay with me because this story gets really strange. Let me take you back to 1959. This happened in the Soviet Union. That was what Russia was called back then. The Soviet Union was a very powerful country. It was also very secretive. The government controlled everything. They controlled the news. They controlled what people could say. And they especially controlled information about anything mysterious or embarrassing. Now, in the Soviet Union, hiking and outdoor sports were really popular. Young people loved going on adventures in the mountains. It was a way to prove you were tough and strong. The government even encouraged it. They wanted their people to be healthy and brave. One of the most popular places to hike was the Ural Mountains. These mountains go from the north of Russia all the way to the south. They separate Europe from Asia. In the winter, the Ural Mountains are brutal. The temperature drops way below zero. Strong winds blow all the time. Snow covers everything. It is one of the hardest places in the world to survive. But experienced hikers loved the challenge. In January 1959, a group of hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute decided to go on a winter hiking trip. This was not just any group. These were some of the best hikers in the whole Soviet Union. They had trained for years. They had been on many difficult trips before. They knew how to survive in the wilderness. Let me tell you about them. The leader was Igor Dyatlov. He was 23 years old. He was a student studying engineering. Everyone said Igor was smart, careful, and a great leader. He had planned this whole trip. He picked the route. He made sure everyone had the right equipment. This was not his first difficult hike. He had done this kind of thing many times before. Then there was Zinaida Kolmogorova. Everyone called her Zina. She was 22. She was tough and loved singing songs around the campfire. She was one of the strongest hikers in the group. Ludmila Dubinina was also 22. Her friends called her Luda. She was studying economics. She loved nature and was always happy and full of energy. Alexander Kolevatov was 24. He was quiet and serious. He was studying physics. He was known for being very smart and very logical. Rustam Slobodin was 23. He was funny and loved making jokes. He was also an engineer student. He kept everyone laughing even when things got hard. Yuri Doroshenko was 21. He was studying economics. He was strong and brave. He always volunteered to do the hardest jobs on hikes. Yuri Yudin was the same age. Everyone called him Yuri too, so sometimes they called him by his last name to avoid confusion. He was loyal and dependable. Georgy Krivonischenko was 23. He was an engineer. He had actually worked at a secret nuclear facility before. This detail will become important later. Nicolas de Beaubrignoles was 23. His family came from France but he grew up in Russia. Everyone called him Kolya. He was brave and strong. And finally, there was Semyon Zolotaryov. He was the oldest at 37. He was not a student. He was actually a war veteran. He had fought in World War II. He had seen terrible things in the war. But he loved the outdoors and asked to join the trip at the last minute. Igor said yes because Semyon had so much experience. So these were the 9 hikers. All of them were experienced. All of them were tough. All of them knew what they were doing in the mountains. Their plan was to hike to a mountain called Otorten. This mountain was in the northern Urals. It was far away from any towns or people. The round trip would take about 2 weeks. They would ski through the snow pulling sleds with their supplies. They would set up camp each night. Then they would reach the mountain and come back. This kind of trip was called a Category 3 hike. That was the hardest level. If you finished a Category 3 hike, you got a special certificate. You could then lead other difficult hikes. That is what they all wanted. On January 25th, the group took a train to a town called Ivdel. From there, they took a truck to an even smaller village called Vizhai. Vizhai was the last place with people. After that, it was just wilderness. On January 27th, they started hiking. At first, everything went great. The weather was cold but not terrible. They were all in good spirits. They sang songs. They joked around. At night, they wrote in their diaries. They took pictures with their cameras. One person in the group was Yuri Yudin. He started feeling sick on the second day. He had back pain and felt weak. He did not want to slow everyone down. So on January 28th, he made a hard choice. He decided to turn back. He said goodbye to his friends and started walking back to the village. Yuri Yudin was the only one who survived. That meant there were now 9 hikers left. Igor Dyatlov, Zina, Luda, Alexander, Rustam, the 2 Yuris wait no, 1 Yuri left now, Georgy, Nicholas, and Semyon. 9 people continued into the mountains. They kept hiking north. Each day they got farther from any help. Each day the mountains got bigger and more empty. But they were doing fine. Their diaries showed they were happy and confident. On February 1st, they reached an area near a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. In the local language, this name meant something creepy. It meant Dead Mountain or Mountain of the Dead. The local people, called the Mansi, had a legend about this mountain. They said it was a bad place. They said strange things happened there. But the hikers did not worry about local legends. They were scientists and students. They believed in logic and preparation. That afternoon, the weather started getting worse. The wind picked up. Snow started falling harder. They decided to set up camp on the slope of the mountain. This was actually a strange choice. Most experienced hikers know you should not camp on an open slope in winter. The wind hits you too hard. It is better to camp in the forest where trees block the wind. But Igor decided to camp on the slope anyway. Maybe he wanted to save time. Maybe he thought they could handle it. We will never know why he made that choice. They set up their tent. They ate dinner. They wrote in their diaries. Everything seemed normal. One of them wrote, "It is hard to imagine such a comfort on the ridge, with a piercing wind and a temperature of -30 degrees. Another wrote about how they were joking around and having fun even though it was so cold. These were the last words they ever wrote. That night, February 1st going into February 2nd, something happened. Something so terrifying that all 9 of them cut through their own tent and ran out into the deadly cold with almost no clothes on. They never came back. So what happened that night? Nobody knows for sure. But we can piece together the evidence from what was found later. When the rescue team arrived weeks later, they looked at the tent very carefully. The tent was still standing. It was half collapsed from snow, but it was still there. Inside, everything looked almost normal. Their backpacks were lined up neatly. Their boots were by the entrance. Extra clothes were folded up. Food was still there, some of it even prepared like they were about to eat it. But there were 9 big slashes cut in the tent. These cuts were made with knives. And they were made from the inside. Someone inside had cut the tent open to get out fast. Why not just use the door? Why cut your own tent? The only reason to do that is if you are in such a panic that you cannot wait even 1 second. You have to get out right now. So all 9 hikers cut their way out and ran. The footprints in the snow told the story. There were 8 or 9 sets of prints. Some were barefoot. Some had only socks. Some had only 1 boot. They were all running or walking fast down the hill toward the forest. The footprints were very strange for another reason. They were calm and organized. They were not scattered everywhere like people running in total panic. They were in a line, like the group stayed together. Some reports said it looked like they were walking calmly, not running. So they left the tent in a huge rush, but then walked calmly down the mountain. That does not make sense. What could make them leave so fast but then not run? The footprints went down the slope for about 1 mile. Then they reached the edge of the forest where big trees grew. After that, the snow was not as deep, so the footprints disappeared. Now, the search teams did not find all of this on day 1. Let me tell you how the search happened because it took a long time. The group was supposed to send a telegram when they got back to the village. They were expected back around February 12th. When they did not send the telegram, people started to worry. But at first, everyone thought maybe they were just delayed. Bad weather happens. Groups come back late sometimes. But by February 20th, families were really scared. They demanded the school send a search team. The school agreed. They sent out volunteer searchers. These were other students and experienced hikers who knew the area. On February 26th, the search team found the tent. That is when they saw the cut tent and the footprints. They followed the footprints down toward the trees. About a mile from the tent, they found the first 2 bodies. It was Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonischenko. They were lying near a big pine tree at the edge of the forest. They were both dead. They had frozen to death. Here is what was so strange. They were almost naked. Yuri Doroshenko had on only underwear. Georgy had a little more clothing but not much. In 30 degrees below zero, you freeze to death in minutes without clothes. Near their bodies was the remains of a small fire. Someone had built a fire using small branches. But the fire had gone out. It was not big enough or hot enough to keep them alive. When the rescuers looked up at the big pine tree, they saw something odd. Branches were broken off the tree, up to 15 feet high. Someone had climbed the tree and broken off branches. Maybe they were trying to get firewood. Or maybe they were trying to see something. Maybe they climbed up to look back at the tent to see if it was safe to return. But why were they almost naked? Where were their clothes? The search team kept looking. They found 3 more bodies over the next few days. About 300 yards from the tree, back toward the tent, they found Igor Dyatlov. He was lying face up in the snow. He had on more clothes than the first 2, but still not enough to survive. He had clearly been trying to walk back to the tent. But he froze to death before he made it. A little farther, they found Zinaida Kolmogorova. She was also trying to get back to the tent. She was on her hands and knees in the snow. She had frozen to death reaching forward, trying to crawl back. Then they found Rustam Slobodin. He was also heading back to the tent. He had a small crack in his skull, but doctors said it probably happened when he fell in the cold. It was not the thing that killed him. He froze to death too. So now they had found 5 bodies. All 5 had died from the cold. They had frozen to death. But where were the other 4? The search continued for 2 more months. They used dogs. They used helicopters. They used soldiers. They could not find the other 4 hikers anywhere. Finally, in May, when some of the snow melted, they found them. They were in a ravine. A ravine is like a small valley or ditch. It was about 75 yards from the big pine tree, deeper into the forest. The 4 bodies were under about 12 feet of snow in a small stream. These bodies were Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nicholas the Bobrignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryov. And this is where the story gets really disturbing. The first 5 bodies were strange, but they made some sense. They froze to death. That is what happens when you are outside in extreme cold without proper clothes. It was tragic but understandable. But the last 4 bodies? They were different. Very different. Let me tell you what the doctors found when they examined them. Nicholas the Bobrignoles had massive damage to his skull. His skull was cracked and broken. This was not from falling. The doctor said it would take a huge amount of force to break a skull like that. Like getting hit by a car. Ludmila Dubinina had terrible injuries to her chest. Her ribs were broken. Not just 1 or 2 ribs. Lots of them. The doctor said again, this kind of injury needs massive force. Like a car crash. But here is the really weird part. She had no cuts or bruises on the outside of her body. Her skin was not damaged. But inside, her chest was crushed. How do you break someone's ribs without damaging the skin? The doctor said it was like she was hit by a huge pressure wave. Something that crushed her from the inside. And there was something else about Ludmila. Her tongue was missing. Her eyes were missing too. The soft tissue of her face was gone. Now, some people think this was from natural decay, or maybe animals ate those parts after she died. That can happen. But it was still creepy and strange. Alexander Kolevatov also had strange injuries. He was missing his eyebrows and part of his face. Semyon Zolotaryov also had major chest injuries. His ribs were broken just like Ludmila's. So 4 people died from freezing. But 4 people died from massive injuries that looked like they had been in a terrible accident. Yet there were no signs of a fight. No other people's footprints. No animal tracks. What could do this? But wait. It gets even stranger. When the investigators tested the clothes from the bodies, they found something shocking. Some of the clothes were radioactive. They had radiation on them. Radiation is the dangerous energy that comes from nuclear material. It can make you very sick. It can kill you. And it was on their clothes. Why? Remember I told you Georgy Krivonischenko worked at a nuclear plant? Maybe he brought contaminated clothes. But other people had radiation on their clothes too. People who never worked at that plant. Also, the investigators found that some of the hikers in the ravine were wearing clothes from the hikers who died first. For example, Ludmila was wearing Yuri Doroshenko's pants. Someone had cut his pants off his body and put them on her. This actually makes sense. When you are freezing to death and you find a dead body, you take their clothes to survive. That is not disrespectful. That is survival. The first people to die were by the fire. The others must have taken clothes from them to try to stay warm. But it still paints a horrible picture. Imagine being so cold that you have to take pants off your dead friend's body. The official investigators wrote down everything they found. They took photographs. They did autopsies. An autopsy is when doctors examine a dead body to figure out how the person died. But then something weird happened. The Soviet government classified the case. That means they made it secret. They told everyone to stop talking about it. They locked away all the files. They would not let anyone see the evidence. For over 30 years, almost nobody knew the full story. Families could not get answers. The case was closed and marked as unknown compelling force. What does that even mean? Unknown compelling force? That is basically saying, something made them die but we have no idea what. Why would the government hide this? What did they not want people to know? So what happened after the bodies were found? Let me tell you about the investigation and how people reacted. First, the families were heartbroken. These were young people with their whole lives ahead of them. They were smart, strong, and loved by everyone who knew them. Their parents could not understand how this happened. The government did hold an investigation. A man named Lev Ivanov was in charge. He was a prosecutor, which means he was like a detective and lawyer combined. He interviewed witnesses. He looked at all the evidence. He went to the mountain himself. But Lev Ivanov was ordered by his bosses to close the case quickly. He was told not to ask too many questions. He was told to write a simple report and move on. In his report, he wrote that the hikers died from a compelling unknown force which they were unable to overcome. That was it. No explanation. No real conclusion. Many years later, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Lev Ivanov spoke about the case. He was an old man by then. He said he always felt like he was forced to hide the truth. He said there were things he saw that he could not put in his official report. He said that he and other investigators saw strange orange lights in the sky around the time of the incident. Other people in the area reported seeing them too. Glowing balls of light flying over the mountains. Were they UFOs? Weather phenomena? Military tests? He did not know. But he was told not to write about them in his report. The area where the hikers died was closed off for 3 years. The government said nobody could go hiking there. Why? They never gave a good reason. The families buried their loved ones. There were funerals. But there were no real answers. Remember Yuri Yudin? The one who turned back because he was sick. He lived the rest of his life with guilt. He felt like if he had stayed, maybe he could have helped. Maybe things would have been different. But logically, he probably would have just died with them. Still, survivor's guilt is very powerful. Yuri Yudin spent his whole life trying to understand what happened to his friends. He gave interviews. He talked to investigators. He went back to the mountain multiple times. He died in 2013, still without a clear answer. The case became famous in Russia, even though it was supposed to be secret. People whispered about it. They made up theories. Some people said it was aliens. Some said it was a government weapon. Some said it was something supernatural. Outside of Russia, almost nobody knew about it for decades. The Soviet Union did not share information with the rest of the world. It was not until the 1990s, when the Soviet Union ended, that the story started spreading internationally. Books were written. Documentaries were made. Investigators from other countries got interested. Everyone wanted to know what really happened. In 2019, 60 years after the incident, the Russian government reopened the case. They said they would investigate it again with modern technology and science. This got everyone excited. Finally, maybe we would get real answers. They spent a year looking into it. They considered all the theories. They did new tests. And in 2020, they announced their conclusion. They said it was an avalanche. A big pile of snow fell on the tent, and that is what made the hikers panic and run. But wait. That does not explain most of the evidence. Let me tell you why people are not satisfied with that answer. But first, let me tell you about all the different theories people have come up with over the years. Over the last 65 years, people have come up with dozens of theories about what happened. Some are based on science. Some are based on conspiracy. Some are just wild guesses. Let me go through the main ones and explain what evidence supports them and what does not. This is what the Russian government said in 2020. They say a slab avalanche hit the tent. A slab avalanche is when a big sheet of snow breaks off and slides down. It can happen suddenly and be very powerful. They say the avalanche damaged the tent and injured some of the hikers inside. That is why some had broken bones. The hikers panicked and cut their way out to escape. Then they ran down the mountain but died from the cold because they could not go back to the tent. What supports this theory? Well, the location they camped was on a slope. Avalanches can happen on slopes. Some of the hikers had crush injuries that could come from heavy snow. What does not support this theory? First, there was no evidence of an avalanche at the scene. The tent was still standing. It was not buried under tons of snow. If an avalanche hit, the tent would be completely destroyed and covered. Second, experienced hikers like Igor Dyatlov would know not to camp in an avalanche zone. They were experts. Third, avalanches make a lot of noise and mess. The snow around the tent was not disturbed in the way an avalanche would disturb it. Fourth, the footprints leading away from the tent were calm and organized. If people just got hit by an avalanche, they would be scattered and panicked. Most experts say an avalanche does not fit the evidence well. This theory says the Soviet military was testing some kind of weapon in the area. Maybe a missile. Maybe a bomb. Maybe something else. The test went wrong, or the hikers were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This could explain the crush injuries. A pressure wave from an explosion can break bones without leaving cuts. It could explain the radiation. Nuclear weapons have radiation. It could explain why the government covered it up. They would not want people to know about a secret military accident. It also explains the orange lights people reported. Those could be missiles or flares. What does not support this theory? There were no burn marks. No chemical traces. No shrapnel or debris from a weapon. If a bomb or missile exploded near them, there would be physical evidence. Also, why would the hikers run away from the tent and stay down by the trees? If you hear an explosion, you try to get as far away as possible, not stay nearby. Some people say maybe it was a test of infrasound weapons. Infrasound is sound that is too low for humans to hear, but it can still affect your body. Some studies show infrasound can make people feel panic, fear, and dizziness. But there is no proof the Soviet military had this technology in 1959. And it does not explain the physical injuries. Could a bear or other animal have attacked them? The Ural Mountains do have bears. What supports this? Animals could explain why they ran from the tent in fear. It could explain some injuries. What does not support this? There were no animal tracks anywhere near the tent or the bodies. No scratches or bite marks. No blood. Bears do not attack like this. Also, bears hibernate in winter. It is very unlikely a bear would be active in February in that cold. Some people suggested a Yeti or Bigfoot type creature. But there is no evidence those exist. And even if they did, why would one attack but leave no tracks? This is a more scientific theory. It focuses on what extreme cold does to the human body and brain. When you are freezing to death, you go through stages. First you shiver. Then you get confused. Your brain stops working right. And then something really weird happens called paradoxical undressing. People who are freezing to death sometimes feel suddenly very hot. So they take off their clothes. It makes no logical sense, but it happens because the brain is shutting down. Also, there is something called hypothermic panic. When you are extremely cold, you can feel sudden intense fear or confusion. You might do things that make no sense, like run away from shelter. This theory says maybe they had a small problem at the tent. Maybe carbon monoxide from a stove. Maybe a small tear in the tent from wind. Something that made them panic. They cut their way out in fear. Once outside, the cold affected their brains. They became confused. They could not think straight. They undressed because of paradoxical undressing. They died from the cold and from injuries caused by falling or stumbling in the dark. What supports this? Hypothermia is real. Paradoxical undressing is real. It explains why some had fewer clothes. What does not support this? It does not explain the major crush injuries. Falling does not break your ribs like that without breaking the skin. It does not explain the radiation. It does not explain why they all left together in an organized way. This is one of the more interesting scientific theories. A scientist named Donnie Eichar studied the case and came up with this idea. When strong wind blows across certain shapes, it can create infrasound. Remember, infrasound is sound waves too low to hear but your body can still feel them. These sound waves can cause panic, fear, headaches, and feelings of dread. Mountains can create these infrasound waves naturally if the wind is just right. Donnie Ikar used computer models and showed that the shape of the mountain where they camped could produce infrasound in strong winds. He thinks the infrasound made all 9 hikers feel intense panic for no reason. They felt like they were in danger even though they were not. So they fled the tent. Once outside, they realized they were not actually in danger, but by then it was too late. They were already too cold to make it back. What supports this? It is scientifically possible. It explains why they left together in a relatively calm way. They were not running from a visible threat. They were running from a feeling. What does not support this? It still does not explain the major injuries. It does not explain the radiation. And would infrasound really make 9 experienced hikers, all at the same time, make such a deadly mistake? The local people in that area were called the Mansi. They were indigenous people who lived there for thousands of years. Some people wondered if maybe the hikers had a conflict with Mansi people. But this theory is generally rejected. The Mansi were peaceful. They had no history of violence against hikers. Plus, there were no signs of other people at the scene. No extra footprints. No weapon marks. The Mansi themselves said they had nothing to do with it and were very sad about what happened. Some people believe it was ghosts, demons, or some kind of paranormal force. The local name for the mountain was Mountain of the Dead, after all. But there is no scientific evidence for this. It is based on fear and mystery, not facts. In 2021, 2 scientists published a detailed study. They said it could have been a very specific type of avalanche called a Kármán vortex. This happens when wind creates pressure that causes snow to break off many hours after people set up camp. They used computer models to show this could cause the specific injuries found on the bodies. The delayed timing could explain why the hikers seemed calm at first, and then suddenly left the tent many hours after setting up. What supports this? The science is sophisticated. The computer models match some of the injury patterns. What does not support this? Again, no clear avalanche evidence at the scene. And it still does not explain everything, like the radiation or the lights in the sky. Some investigators think it was not just one thing. Maybe it was several things that happened together to create a perfect storm of disaster. Maybe there was a small avalanche or snow slide that scared them and hurt some people. Then they made bad decisions because of panic and cold. Then hypothermia set in. Then some fell into the ravine and got hurt worse. This is actually pretty reasonable. Real life is messy. Disasters often happen because of multiple things going wrong at once, not just one dramatic cause. So what really happened? Here is my honest opinion after looking at all the evidence. I think something scared them out of the tent. Maybe it was wind and infrasound creating a feeling of panic. Maybe it was a small snow collapse on the tent. Maybe it was something else we still do not understand. They cut the tent to get out fast. They thought they needed to leave immediately. Once outside, they realized they could not stay at the tent for some reason. Maybe it was damaged. Maybe they were still afraid. Maybe they thought something was still there. So they went down to the tree line to wait it out and build a fire. They thought they would wait until morning and then go back. But the cold was worse than they thought. The fire was not enough. 2 died by the fire. The others tried to return to the tent but froze on the way. The 4 in the ravine tried to make a shelter. Maybe they fell. Maybe injuries from the panic at the tent got worse. Maybe they were just unlucky. They died from cold and trauma. The radiation is harder to explain. Maybe it was contamination from Georgie's old work. Maybe they came across something on the mountain we do not know about. Maybe the testing done later contaminated the samples. The missing tongue and eyes. Probably natural decay and scavenging animals after death. The lights in the sky. Possibly military tests in the general area, but not directly related to their deaths. I think it was a tragic accident made worse by panic, bad luck, and the brutal cold. Not aliens. Not monsters. Not murder. Just a series of terrible decisions made in fear that cost 9 people their lives. But that is just my theory. The truth is, we will probably never know for sure. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most haunting mysteries in history. 9 experienced hikers went into the mountains and something made them so afraid that they fled into the deadly cold. Most died from freezing. Some died from terrible injuries we still cannot fully explain. For over 60 years, people have tried to solve this mystery. Families wanted answers. Scientists wanted explanations. The Russian government tried to close the case but kept the details hidden for decades. Even today, with all our modern technology and knowledge, we cannot say with total certainty what happened on that mountain. The pass where they died is now called Dyatlov Pass, named after their leader Igor Dyatlov. It is a memorial to them. Some hikers still go there today to pay respects and to see the place where this mystery happened. What do I believe? I think the truth is probably less dramatic than aliens or secret weapons. I think it was a combination of bad luck, a scary situation, panic, and the brutal reality of nature. The cold does not care how experienced you are. It does not care how well you prepared. One mistake, one moment of fear, and everything can go wrong. But the reason this story still grabs us is because of the things we cannot explain. The radiation. The crush injuries with no external damage. The lights in the sky. The way the government acted. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Maybe that is what makes them so powerful. They remind us that even in our modern world, there are still things we do not understand. If this story kept you thinking, if it made you wonder about what really happened on that frozen mountain, then subscribe to this channel. Every week I bring you more true stories from history that are stranger and scarier than any fiction. Real life is terrifying enough. Thanks for watching. And stay curious about the mysteries that still surround us.